We are live. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We're at the Althea community call. I'm Deborah Sempier. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Hawk Networks, who incubated and supports the Althea protocol and stack. And I am joined here today with Jim from Conekt, who's going to do some introductions here in a minute. But if this is your first community call, you might notice it's a bit casual. We're going to talk through just kind of some of the themes, introduce you to what we're talking about with Althea Mobile, but we welcome questions. So if you're joining on Twitter or LinkedIn, or you can find us on Discord, feel free to pop in some questions, or YouTube, and we'll be happy to answer them here on the call. Or you can find us on any of those places afterwards if you have burning questions that didn't get answered as we go through things. So happy Friday, everybody. Jim, if you want to just start us off with an introduction of who you are, what your background is, and who's Conekt.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Deborah. So again, Jim Ranke. I'm the head of technical strategy for Conekt. Conekt is a SaaS platform responsible for eSIM switching or just general connectivity as a whole. And so what you'll see is we're really developing a platform to give ubiquitous coverage regardless of coverage type. So initially we started out with the eSIM switching, being able to switch between carriers. Now we offer Wi-Fi offload, and then our integration with Althea and team for private networks. And so that's kind of what Conekt does. And then my background, I've been in the industry since 97, doing various different roles. Started at PCS Primeco, and then spent a majority of my career as a distinguished engineer for Verizon, doing anything from automotive to IoT platform development to IoT hardware development. So kind of my background.
I think that's really salient too. I mean, you spent a long time in the trenches of both the kind of MNO environment, right? And then kind of as it relates to a bit of the IoT and application on the private networking side. And Althea really kind of kicked off in 2017 as this idea that there was kind of fundamental problems within this telecom stack that were, preventing these models from being more financially sustainable, from more operators being able to build networks, or for this idea of sovereignty, that people could build networks in ways where they can have more control of their data or their connectivity flow, which I think is really important today. And I'm really curious your thoughts on, what with Conekt and with Althea, they're working between the private and then the public interfacing and orchestration. What are these things actually really solve? What are the problems that we're seeing today that aren't just solved by the classical MNO or private, disparate private network?
Yeah, I would say is you're seeing connectivity needs in enterprise space or just as a whole going up across the board. And so what you're seeing is that you want to always on connected or always on connection, which has really driven a lot of enterprises to have a multi MNO or MVNO solution. And so that's really where Conekt comes in as a single pane of glass. So they're not managing multiple disparaged portals to be able to manage their lines of service. And then what you're seeing the growth with the private networks as you're seeing automation with robotics or autonomous vehicles. You're looking at enterprises wanting more control of those networks, being able to not only have things where on public networks, you'll see adoption with network slicing with 5G, where they can customize kind of the solution that for specific use cases and verticals. You're seeing even more demand in the warehousing and manufacturing space, where they really want to control the network end to end and be completely sovereign from that standpoint to really take it to the next level. So for example, network slicing on a commercial network, you can set jitter times and latency, things like that. But then you're limited to what your bandwidth allocation is for spectrum assignment, where with the new 5G networks, you can really break up your spectrum to, hey, maybe you have a very uplink heavy use case. And so you could build a private network that would focus on that uplink heavy use case. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're really talking about a lot of these flexibility standpoints, I mean, I even think about as soon as like 5 or 10 years ago, the cost to build, like to implement your own core and the complexities of like rolling that out and having access to spectrum, were really just in the MNO space. And it wasn't democratized and easy for, a variety of operators to use. And I'm really excited to see kind of with the catalyst of like open spectrum with CBRS that came along, that invited a lot of building and tooling. This is, of course, Althea's or Hawk Networks has developed this product, KLTE 5G, which is, this, really affordable and flexible, to your point, flexible stack. And there's many options on that point as well. But I think that's what's really exciting to me is like now we have all of the, like, people have Lego pieces, and it's not just MNOs that have access to this right now. It can be a private company, it could be a municipality, it can be public safety, that can, build with these Legos. And I think, so the SIM stack and orchestration is kind of interesting too. That's really changed a lot and evolved over the years too. So I'm curious, you're heavily into that. Like, how do you see this evolving? Like what's changing around that? And then how are we using that to maybe kind of riff on that a bit as well?
Yeah. So what you're seeing is, I think really what's driving this openness is new technologies, especially in the SIM space. And so before, you were really carrier locked with the SIM and was not easy to switch to another provider. And so what you're seeing is, back in 2017, you had your first initial eSIM switching with what was called the SPG 20 or 02. And that was really targeted towards the M2M market. A little bit more complex that used like text messages and things like that to trigger your changes. And so with that, there was an evolution for consumer market that kind of put an applet on the device that was called SPG 22. And you really saw wide scale adoption with that on like, really what drove adoption was wearables or small form factor devices, because you had like the Apple Watch that came out and they didn't want to have a SIM card slot because it increases the size of the form factor, et cetera. And so by going to a remote programmable SIM where you can say, hey, I want this to be on AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, Vodafone, that reduces the form factor and then still gives you that flexibility. And then you're seeing kind of that drive and innovation again with the Apple Watch, with like products like 5G RedCap. So like the newest Apple Watch that just came out. And so you're seeing some of that innovation be pushed from more of the Silicon Valley side of forcing these MNOs to adopt new technologies. And then Conekt will be launching the third generation of kind of that eSIM switching that's really meant for IoT, that kind of takes the best of the 02 and 22 and then comes out with what's called a 32 IoT version of that really simplifies the eSIM switching. And so today we have obviously the M2M integration with Althea to be able to do it for the initial profile switching, which is not widely available for public to private switching. And so that's kind of a very unique offering that we can support with Althea, where you could have it start on a private network and then switch over to public or vice versa. And then that process will just get simpler with the IoT version, because then we can have on-device triggering and things like that.
Well, that's what I'm really hearing too. And I think this is the big unlock of the partnership, is to your initial point was this like idea of single pane of glass and really reducing the complexity of operating and managing networks that are flexible enough to meet, whether you're a factory that's got new ATVs and scanners and needs to manage that process, or your public safety and you want to make sure your towers are going to stay online for your first responders. Obviously I'm a Pacific Northwest native. We have fire season over here that's sometimes demands some flexibility on the ground. So I think what's exciting is that these now are like, this partnership really unlocks ease of use that just wasn't there before. So you can take the SIMs, you can build the network, it'll work on the private, and then it can fall back and work on the public networks as needed and can be managed from one dashboard, much more simply than it was, even just a few years ago. And I think that's pretty exciting. I was curious though, you were You were saying that a lot of the innovation was being driven from just like devices like traditional handsets and consumer type stuff. Are you seeing that some of the traction on the, like I was just talking about enterprises and public safety, it feels like that's gradually catching up a bit, but curious if you're seeing that too.
Yeah, no, I think you're seeing a lot of adoption, especially with the 5G networks in the public safety realm. And so that's where you're seeing the carriers focus their initial network slices would be public safety slices to be able to guarantee latency, throughput, and jitter. And so if you look, T-Mobile, their very first network slice was focused for public safety. Same thing with Verizon. Their first network slice would be focused towards a public safety use case. And then what I would say is you're going to see a demand in the future where public safety would want to be able to have not only things like FirstNet or Frontline, but also the ability to rapidly deploy their own like cows or Colts or private network type solutions. In the past, they relied heavily on the carriers to, they would call the carrier and say, hey, we have a, fire going on in this area. We need you to deploy a cow or a Colt or cell site on wheels or cell site on light truck. Where now you would see potentially public safety owning their own cows or Colts for rapid deployments and things like that, or building their own private networks in areas that wouldn't make financial sense for the carriers. And then with the advancement in satellite, you're seeing more backhaul options where you could potentially use satellite as backhaul. And I think you'll see a lot of innovation in the satellite realm. And as I mentioned, Conekt, we're looking at being ubiquitous connectivity, whether it's from cellular, being able to switch to different carriers or private networks like we're doing with Althea. We also have partnerships to be able to do, Wi-Fi offloading through some of the different cable operators. And then we also have partnerships with like a Global Star for SATCOM. And so we'll continue to expand on those partnerships to bring in, potentially satellite backhaul for private networks and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just hits home these two core, like building with sovereignty, which means you can build in ways in which there's more control and autonomy. Like you said, sometimes there's different use cases that maybe the financial perspective of it is different. And this idea of resiliency and being able to kind of like build in ways that are solutions for that particular network, I think is just really exciting. And I think you also hit on another thing that's that I think that we at like Althea find as one of our kind of core principles, and this is the like agnosticity of transport of the different hardware, whether that's you're going over fiber optic cable or 5G or satellite, it doesn't matter. And that really the core of Althea's protocol is a flexible and dynamic routing, and then the machine-to-machine payments that allow for this kind of fintech stack to fit all together, which I'd like to just riff a little bit about how this all fits into that, like, stack of tools that allow people to build, in sovereign and resilient ways. And this idea of being able to build across any medium possible, and then having that single pane of glass that kind of helps orchestrate and manage it, I think is like key to how it all fits together. So if you think about a Lego box, you can use the different pieces of it, but underpinned by this like fintech stack, being able to build for the resources. I mean, this can include things like spectrum as well, which I want to get into in just a little bit. But I think it's pretty exciting to be able to just switch to the hardware that's needed without totally having to reinvent and reintegrate a whole new like software stack into it. And having that be kind of fully holistic is part of this vision I think we're building together that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I think that's part of the reason why Conekt partnered with Althea is the fintech stack is really, I see that as the driver in the future. So now that you have these technologies that you can deploy in enterprise, government, public safety space, how do you actually finance it? Especially with financing getting so expensive. with your traditional interest rates. And then I think now, rather than backing something up with like a meme coin, now you're backing it up with, physical infrastructure that's generating revenue. And then, as you have all these bits and pieces that are coming together, this is really a way to be able to financially benefit everybody that's involved in the process, whether that's, hey, you're providing the spectrum for leasing, so now you can get a portion of the revenue that's generated off the tower. You built the tower, so you can get a portion of the, whatever revenue is generated off that tower that's built, all the way down to, hey, I'm sharing my home Wi-Fi with my neighbor, and I get a little piece of, or they pay me a little piece for sharing my Wi-Fi with them. And so I think ultimately that's the vision of the future for connectivity, is not only least cost routing, but also how do you make sure everybody's getting paid?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and even as soon as like last year, I think, was it like reading or someone had coined the term bankruptcy G, as we saw really a lot of the really a lot of the traditional models for financing were just too brittle. And it wasn't, that people were malicious or, no one sitting up there, trying to create unsustainable models. But unfortunately, because they didn't have these integrations, I feel like there was just the lack of flexibility really created unsustainable, financing models that were, that could maybe work in 2021 and 2022, but just kind of fall apart as we get into the, the economies that we're in now. So yeah, I think we started working on this idea of like liquid infrastructure, which is basically, fractionalizing up the revenue share, as you say, and being able to finance and provide capital into these infrastructure that makes sustainable sense. So everybody's returning then long-term revenues back. And then it gives a lot of, just basically kind of the Lego stack for the financing side of it as well. And we're super excited. We had the announcement of a large deal that was done using liquid infrastructure in Arizona, and it's really kind of exciting to see that it come to life and be able to empower different operators who maybe either couldn't access capital or the models just were too brittle. And now we have this whole like flexible end-to-end stack that works again with the routing side of it and the orchestration side with Conekt, to really put that together as a full, easy to run package, as opposed to where we were a decade ago, right?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely critical. I mean, because these networks do cost money to build and maintain and support, and so having good financial models to be able to maintain them long term, I think, is critical. And then I just don't see the financial models of the carriers going out and there's areas that just don't financially make sense for carriers to build, but with this type of liquid infrastructure, then you're able to build in areas that you traditionally wouldn't have.
So that's a good segue, I think, into talking about a topic on a lot of folks' mind right now, which is spectrum. It's been on all the news articles, lots of spectrum moving around between private deals, and of course CBRS is in question. I would love for you to share just kind of your overall thoughts on what the market is doing in spectrum, and then maybe we can chat a little bit about we have a product called Spectrum IQ that I think hopefully addresses some of, again, same sort of brittleness on the spectrum side of the market, but would love to just get your take. You've been in the industry a long time.
Yes. Yeah, no, this is a near and dear to my heart with spectrum. So I mentioned I started in the industry in 97. It was right after the PCS auction of 96. Not that everybody knows that, but I've followed every spectrum auction ever since. I would tell you that spectrum is the lifeblood of the wireless industry. It is absolutely critical. And you're seeing a lot of movement here. So recently you saw acquisition by AT&T from Dish Network, moving their 600 megahertz and some mid-band spectrum over to AT&T. This has really shored up AT&T's spectrum positioning. Before, I was worried about their long-term viability, but this really gives spectrum, or AT&T would be almost positioned in the best spectrum spot going forward. They have very clean spectrum, so This will allow them to catch up with T-Mobile and deploy their 5G SA, because now they have access to 600 megahertz clean spectrum nationwide. And then it fills in their mid-band spectrum. Talking about like the CBRS that you mentioned, first off, I'm a huge advocate for both licensed and unlicensed spectrum. I think they're both absolutely critical going forward, because I think you see a lot of adoption of new technologies and advancements that you wouldn't see with the unlicensed spectrum like CBRS, because you have innovative partners like Althea that are driving things like fintech and things that you wouldn't see from your traditional carriers. But then I also think licensed spectrum is very important, because you need a guarantee, hey, this spectrum is going to be available to use while I'm autonomously operating a vehicle. And so sometimes CBRS may not be ideal for that. And so I think, again, that's part of the reason why we partnered with Althea, is because you have the ability to have a mixed licensed and unlicensed spectrum deployments, especially with like our partnership with Globalstar and the band 53 spectrum. I think that's a perfect like control channel that you can use to connect up, and that's your always there dedicated connection. And then you can supplement with things like CBRS or band 41 or other spectrum that's licensed or unlicensed to fill in some of those gaps. So I'll stop there.
No, it's a lot to cover. We could spend a whole call just riffing on spectrum, but it is such a critical piece to the stack. And again, I think it suffers from the same thing we've been talking about, that brittleness, right? It's a sort of lack of flexibility. It's sold usually in chunks in one auction, and we've been working together with y'all and other partners, like you said. Globalstar has been I think is one of the amazing companies that has a very forward-looking approach to almost this idea of what even is an MNO and MVNO, what is a network. I think the idea of like these things being very separate is blurring now. I mean, you really can have an enterprise. You can have a Mic Mobile. Anybody can sort of run these tools and be an MNO or MVNO. But just a kind of stream of consciousness here, as these things shift, spectrum still suffers from that same brittleness that we saw with the financial models that we've been kind of talking about earlier and all of that. So we're really excited about, this concept we call Spectrum IQ, that breaks these into like more manageable chunks, that is more accessible, that brings it into the orchestration layer. And we're just kind of really on the start of that types of things. But you can do the same liquid infrastructure and revenue share models with spectrum that you can do with other things. And it is an exciting time to see this shift really start to occur, and these tool sets now being accessible to more types of operators. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. That said, there's a bit of I think where I'm frustrated is hardware really hasn't kept up.
Yeah.
We're still really not seeing the hardware guys come to play here. So I don't know if you're seeing anything on the horizon that you could share on that front. But that's the amazing momentum that this shift has happened over the last couple of years. It has been tampered a bit by lack of hardware.
Yeah, I would say I think that was probably one of the biggest challenges, especially with like CBRS. But I think one thing that kind of changed the CBRS dynamic is whenever carriers started deploying it to supplement their own, that started forcing band 48 or N48 into your more consumer devices, which also drove adoption for that band into like your IoT use cases. As well as like your routers and stuff like that. And then you also see companies like MVNOs like Comcast, Charter, Cox that also use CBRS to supplement what they're paying to the carriers. And so they would deploy, like CBRS or public-private network, I would say, to supplement usage. And then you're seeing a lot of especially in the agricultural space, I would say you're seeing a lot of adoption for private networks. So you've seen like John Deere, Caterpillar have all come out with pretty advanced private network planning for autonomous or robo agriculture type use cases in the future. And I would see like your Spectrum IQ has a perfect opportunity for, even carriers to monetize spectrum that they're not using, because in a lot of these agricultural areas, carriers aren't building out private or building out networks. And so that could be an opportunity for them to sublease some of their spectrum through a program like Spectrum IQ to help monetize, and then that drives the adoption, and then it drives, and I think that'll help drive the adoption with the hardware as you see more devices leveraging it. And then that's always been a challenge as you add new bands, new frequencies. It always typically, your hardware tends to trail about a year behind whenever it actually gets deployed.
Yeah, it's a fair point. And actually, I'm glad that you brought up like the Caterpillar and John Deere and agriculture, because what that will do on the hardware side is also build a more flexible stack, right? You'll probably see more drive on the SDR, the software-defined radios, and hopefully ORAN as well, too. ORAN is a really promising, more modular Lego-like stack. Really hasn't seen a ton of commercial adoption yet. Maybe that's arguable, but I'm hopeful that if we're driving the hardware conversation by use cases like mines, oil and gas, industrial types of more practical, that we might also see just sort of some more practical applications on the hardware side too. But to your point, that mid-market's a bit tough, right? It's tough to find that hardware price point that makes sense for hardware providers to come in, and with that market share. So hopefully we'll see some movement kind of on that front as well. But these are happening, and we are we're seeing that shift, and it is exciting. We had Fritz have a quick question here in the LinkedIn, asking if we've seen interest from institutional funders, especially Chad Telco, infra project finance players regarding Althea's liquid infrastructure. And yes, we have. It's been really exciting. And I think that, again, it goes back to the problem, right? The traditional structures have fallen short and brittle to finance. And there's a lot of, great projects that return sustainable revenues. People pay their internet and network bills consistently. So it's exciting to see these kind of stacks from both sides of the players too right now, because also too because it's been a whole other chat talking about private equity in in broadband in particular, or just in telecom in general, which has its own has had some struggles on sustainability as well as of late, right? As these kinds of things are kind of come to fruition. And so I think that we're seeing a lot of appetite from both traditional and maybe some new types of capital providers that are they're thinking about things in new ways. And so it is it's been exciting to see that traction. I don't know, too, if Jim, if you have anything on that to add in terms of how you think about that, or how Conekt sees those things as well. But we're certainly seeing a lot of appetite.
Yeah, no, and I think you're going to have to look at investment completely different over these next couple of decades as a whole. Like if you look at it right now, we have the largest population that's about to go into retirement. And typically whenever they go into retirement, they're going to change their funds from high risk funds to more stable funds, or something that like, liquid infrastructure that gives guaranteed returns. And so I think that's going to be important going forward, as you see, I think the stock market as a whole will shift as you have this whole boomer generation move into retirement.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's really key. And one of the things you said earlier too is this does allow folks to like be part of projects that make sense for them to care about, right? Maybe you care about infrastructure in your local community or the municipality or whatever. And there's a lot of different ways that this then can align not only with your your thesis for investment, but also your thesis on, the world you want to see, right? Again, we're building more sovereign, more resilient and sustainable infrastructure. And so we're seeing that a lot too. I think it's a chance to really be a part of infrastructure and take back some of that agency, because sometimes it can feel a lot like, we don't really have a lot of control in how the internet is run, or, because even bridge projects and stuff. But this is a way to kind of also be aligned and supporting projects that that you want to see come to fruition. So we like that too. I mean, we work, one of our partners, just to riff on that a little bit too, is Conekt Humanity, who has really been amazing in thinking about things in terms of like the impacts that we make and building networks that are sustainable, not only from just a cost perspective, but also sustainable to that community, about having local leadership in the area. And that's what was so exciting about the Arizona project that was just funded, is that we're able to keep local leadership and keep that, that network as that really positive beacon in that community as well. So there's a lot of, I think, alignment that happens both in the needs of the users and the needs of the different participants in that project as well too, which is cool to see. I mean, it's a big part of the reason why we started Althea, was to like, let's make these things work for the communities that they're built in.
Yeah, and I really like that aspect of it, because it really gives that local control back to local municipalities, because who knows better what their community needs than the local, where a lot of times, like I mentioned, I worked for a large carrier, and their priorities typically aren't always aligned with what the local or needs would be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, and that's the thing too, is like, I mean, large carriers oftentimes don't have good net promoter scores, and people like their dentists better than their carrier a lot of time. But this isn't because the leadership is like evil or bad. It's because it's really not in a very good aligned way. So our hope and thesis is that you can create systems that better align, whether you're a big carrier, whether you're, an enterprise, or you're a municipality, whoever is running these things, that things just align better, and people have better outcomes in that way too, because the systems themselves work better. We are slow and incremental builders because of this, because building systems takes time. So for the community that's been with us for the last 7 years that we've been building, we appreciate everybody that's been by our side and watching this build kind of one step at a time. But it feels like things are, that holistic stack is really kind of coming together. And of course, Conekt has been such a big partner and part of that. Being able to roam and utilize the public networks and have that single pane of glass for orchestration is such a key unlock, that I'm so excited that we're going to be obviously rolling it out and talking more about this over the next, few months and so forth. And, but it's cool.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited. I mean, and really to give back control of, hey, maybe I want to filter the network for enterprise use cases, or maybe I need to have different network attributes for high speed upload, so like I'm working with a partner right now that, needs to offload 10 terabytes of data in 2 hours. And so
that's kind of fun. Like, okay, so let's we're coming to the bottom of the hour here. I would love to, like, what's the future going to look like? So we've got our our flying cars and autonomous everything. And I'm talking to you 5 years from now, we're reminiscing about this day. What is the networks of the future look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see a big mix of connectivity types. And so talking of drones or autonomous vehicles, I mean, if you look at some of the challenges that they're facing today, like I have one network partner or one autonomous vehicle partner that has to put in 3 different carrier TCUs, or telematic control units, or routers, to be able to maintain connectivity. They also are potentially looking at using Wi-Fi offloading. And then like they have some drop-off pickup locations at hotels that wouldn't be ideal, or that aren't ideal for carrier coverage. And so in that case, potentially deploying private network within those known poor coverage areas to fill in those gaps. So that way, when you're at those drop-off and pickup locations for a robo-taxi, you can unlock the car or get into the robo-taxi. I'm working with like a partner for like roof-mounted drones for public safety use cases. And so in that case, think about it. You wouldn't necessarily want your drone to lose connectivity whenever it's flying over the city. And so that would be, again, ubiquitous coverage, whether that's through one carrier or 5 carriers or private network mix. And so I see really a future where connectivity is all combined, regardless of the technology type, whether it's BLE, Wi-Fi, 5G, 6G, satellite. You're going to see kind of a consolidation of coverage or connectivity.
So I think another interesting thing about this is, the financial, speaking back to again financial models, like I'm not sure that we'll see just a purely like pay for access model in the future either, right? As again, if we think about something like a company running their own network as well, they might offer like no cost things. There might be these kinds of things around freemium models. There might also be some, so I think that's going to be an interesting evolution as well too. As you're saying, coverage becomes more ubiquitous. It becomes a less disaggregated by all the different fiber, whatever else, and also disaggregated by what companies are kind of running that infrastructure. Almost like you really will see this kind of blended open access type of thing evolve. But I also think maybe for better or worse, some of how we pay for these networks. So for us, like one of the things that, I personally care a lot about is, that people can make choices about how they want to pay for access, right? And they don't have to give up privacy necessarily for that, or they don't have to give up their data, or they don't have to give up their location, or whatever it is they don't want to give up, and they at least have some choices around all of that. So I'm hopeful that, these financial models will evolve into hopefully more of a la carte menu and less of a, you have to take this. But it remains to be seen.
Yeah, and I think long-term, you'll start looking at things like least cost routing. So, hey, is it cheaper to route it over Wi-Fi or cellular, or SATCOM, et cetera? And then I would also say that that we kind of need to move away from billing for bits and bytes, and it's going to be more based on quality of service
and latency. So the thing, quality of service is not just always throughput. Like this idea of speed being the metric, I think is such a has really created a lot of weird incentives, because then providers are trying to prioritize your speed test traffic, and it really doesn't actually speak to the quality metrics. So I'm hoping we're getting some more depth of quality metrics as things go along too.
I think you really will, because I think the demands will go up, and so people will start. So in the past, it on a 4G network, it was like best effort, and so you get QCI or different QCI values, and so hey, I could be front of the line or back of the line. Where with the new 5G technologies, you can start guaranteeing quality of service and guaranteeing latency and jitter numbers and things like that. And so as that becomes available, you'll start seeing those requirements start being demanded. And then, especially with like the adoption of AI and things like that, I think latency will eventually be the key. Just think about the early days of the stock exchange. It was important to be, how close am I to the exchange? And now they're talking about how many milliseconds does it take, or picoseconds, or whatever it is. And so you're going to get down to that range depending on different use cases. And then, I see a point we had Meta do their demo or attempt their demo. And of course, the connectivity guys always get blamed. It was the Wi-Fi's fault. But I see eventually, everybody will have a pair of AI glasses that they walk around. And so I have a little heads-up display. I walk into a room, it'll sync up to my LinkedIn, and it'll be like, hey, this is Deborah. This is the last time you had a meeting with Deborah. This is what you talked about. And so all of that's going to have real-time impacts. And I say glasses, but I'll be honest, it's going to be a pendant first with a camera and speaker. And I think eventually we're going to get to a point where people are 100% recording their lives digitally with an AI companion. And so that way I can later on go back and say, Jarvis, or whatever you want to call it, hey, where did I leave my keys earlier today? And the AI camera will say, hey, you left it on the counter. And so I think that's eventually the point that you're going to get to.
Yeah, I think exactly right. And I think this is why these principles around sovereignty and resilience and choices, matter a lot about as we implement these AI and so forth, right? And being able to have a little bit more agency over how that is impacting your, your real life, right?
Yeah, and I think it will be even more important in the future because I think in the past, like we had sensitive data on our computers. Now I think we'll have our entire lives recorded on our computers. And so I think that people become much more security conscious of who has access to their data and what data they have access to, because now, I mean, think about it in the past before Google could tell what your browser history was and what they could discern from what you're looking at from browser history. Think about what you'd be able to discern from AI whenever I wear a camera and a microphone with me 24/7. It'll know everything about my life. And so I think people will want more sovereign or resilient ways to store or keep their information private.
There's another side of this too. Like if you think about also that, and that applies to both people and enterprises, right? Too, or yeah. But the other neat thing that's actually evolving on, just to riff back to the hardware side of it, is like the RIC, right? The radio integrated control, the X apps that are coming to the radios as well. The radios are becoming much more smart, right? So we can actually implement things like that dynamic spectrum IQ or other types of privacy, or there's a lot that we can now do on the, are just starting to evolve on the radio side as well too. So it's one thing we didn't talk about too much when we're talking about hardware, but there is a whole evolution also of these kind of more smarter, radios and more applications and things that I think is exciting as well. That will help, I think, on both sides of that kind of choice and security side.
Yeah, and I think you'll see a lot more advancement with like software-defined antennas and radios.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Just with the amount, like, I mean, if you look at whenever we started this industry, we had one band, 850 megahertz, and now it seems like there's a new band added every other week. And so, I think you'll see a lot more advancements with not only using software-defined radios, but also with technologies like dynamic spectrum sharing, things like that, or even I could see a future where you have kind of like what's in Japan, where you have sharing between the carriers of spectrum, which is kind of what I saw as like the CBRS as a common band between carriers. But I also see some challenges for licensed spectrum, because one thing we didn't really talk about is that especially in the States, it's become very pro MNO and pro enterprise for spectrum, is with the recent purchases. So you're seeing that, SpaceX bought all the spectrum from Dish Network as well as AT&T. And then you're also seeing like what was left of US Cellular being acquired by Verizon and T-Mobile for their spectrum. And so, like I mentioned, spectrum's a very valuable asset. But I also see the FCC's not letting people sit on spectrum anymore and be speculators. And so I think what you'll see is if you buy spectrum, you're going to be expected to use it going forward. And so I think that'll also drive a lot of the adoption, where you won't have people acquiring spectrum not to deploy it rapidly.
This is why I think it's so important to have and this is where, kind of the whole Althea fintech stack like fits in, right? I mean, because a big part of the reason why this is kind of not been more utilized is like, there's the secondary market really didn't evolve, right? And the leasing market and so forth. And now we can do that. And this is really why we focus on like, okay, well, how do we enable more people to access the spectrum, and then the carriers to be able to monetize that and so forth, and use it in different ways. And so, yes. And then if you kind of think about the whole kind of Althea fintech stack, you have the underlying just kind of settlement, where those you have the least cost routing, and then you have the payments being made. That all kind of fits as part of that whole process that enables these marketplaces to then take fruition. But I do think it's a bit of like you have to get the financial models in place in order to allow for these marketplaces to evolve. So,
and I think that secondary market will start to pick up now.
I think so too.
I think you'll start to see constraints with CBRS. It looks like there will be some changes with how that is deployed in the future. Ultimately, I think a chunk of that will end up being auctioned off to the carriers, and then potentially move to a high power band instead of a low power band. just based off of what I'm seeing in the marketplace. And so I think that secondary market, especially if private networks are going to succeed, will really, really have some growth. And I think it's a good way for spectrum holders. I mean, even the carriers, there's the places that they're never going to deploy. And for agriculture or rural areas, that this could have a opportunity for them to generate additional revenue on spectrum that they're not using.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, I think all of this is actually, you know, it's a little bit of frothiness in the market as, like you said, as these spectrum buys happen, and it feels like it's a bit stagnating. But I do actually think it is going to force these, you know, markets to come online and create this along with this major catalyst that's happening that's like blurring like what is an MNO and MVNO and all of the other stuff is coming together. So it does really feel like, I think over the last couple of years that we are at like an inflection point about how we think about cellular in general, or just networks in general. Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic and excited about it.
Builders in the market, you know, with like satellite direct to cell, things like that, that will drive different IoT adoption and use cases, drive more competition. And so I'm all about, you know, variety of technologies.
Well, I think this partnership is such a big unlock to creating that future, and I hope that folks that joined us today will continue to keep an eye on what we're doing together here on LinkedIn. We also have a Twitter at Althea.network, and Discord if you'd like to join our community. We'd love to have folks, you know, plug in, or if you're interested, just reach out to us. And we'd love to see if you're trying to build something creative, sovereign, or resilient. I think then we might have some tools in our toolbox for you. Jim, how would folks get a hold of Conekt?
Just our website, Conekt.ai, and then you can reach out to us there.
All right. Well, you haven't seen the last of us. This is kind of a brief introduction to this awesome partnership that we're doing. Also, if you're going to Mobile World Congress in October in Vegas, the Conekt team and some Althea representatives will be there. So please do get in touch if you want to meet one-on-one and say hi, talk about spectrum or this Althea mobile or switching or private networks or whatever's on your mind. We'd love to meet you. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Deborah.
And Andy.